Okay, here's some feedback on your task 2 answer. First of all, like I did with task 1, I've put your answer on the 3 pages that you've used over here. And on the right hand side you can see the original question. One of the consequences of improved medical care is that people are living longer and life expectancy is increasing. Do you think the advantages of this development outweigh the disadvantages? Now, before I go through your answer to this, I'm going to show you the sample answer. You'll see it on the email that I sent to you. I've attached this sample answer. This comes from the book, and what I want to do is just demonstrate why this is a sample or model answer. It's not necessarily an IELTS band 9 point. It's not necessarily a band 9, although it's very close. The reason I want to show it is because it's very straightforward. The language is good but not amazingly academic. There's enough vocabulary in there and enough variation in the language used for it to get a high band score. So what you told me was that you seem to be stuck on 6.5 and you need to get up to 7, a minimum of 7 and 7.5 overall. You said you score highly in other areas, but it's the writing that's letting you down currently. You talked about an awareness of different types of essays and what kind of sentences the paragraphs consist of, and that you've had essays reviewed and they come back around 7 to 7.5 for task 2 and slightly lower for task 1. So what's going wrong? You said apparently you can't perform well exam conditions. Well, that's probably true in this case because you probably show the potential to write and get a 7 and 7.5 because that's what the teacher says. And you've given me some suggestions as to what the problem might be. You're not sure if your ideas are off topic or had small multiple grammar errors, as you know well. Just looking at what you commented when you sent the essays to me, you said you took an hour to do task 1 and task 2 and that you only had 1 to 2 minutes for proofreading. So ideally you would have up to 5 minutes for task 2 to plan for it. And you would have more than 2 minutes to proofread what you've written. However, a common thing for students is that they run out of time in the writing or that they feel rushed towards the end. So it takes a long time to get going, but you feel rushed towards the end, and by the time you're into the flow, you're into your 3rd page, and you could write another page probably, but the time runs out. So let's look at your actual essay now for task 2. And before we look at your essay, I just want to point out one more thing. That is, I've read out the question already. So writing task 2 always has a statement or an opinion, something like that. There's a question, and that's the question that you've got to answer. In this case, it's an advantages against disadvantages. And there's some help. Give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge of experience. This is key. So as you answer this question, this is very important. Remember that IELTS task 2. First of all, you give your opinion, whereas in task 1 you don't give your opinion, or you don't really bring in outside knowledge, you just say what you see. And the thing about task 2 is it's not a university level essay. So if you're doing a master's at university or further study at university and you had to write an academic essay with referencing, it's a different kind of essay at a higher level, I would suggest, than IELTS level. IELTS is kind of what I call high school level. That is, that as long as you get the basics right, the structure, the paragraphing, the cohesion, the coherence, and the spelling is correct, and the grammar and the words that you've chosen are spelled correctly, and everything's in place, then you can get a high mark. And you can use your own examples. So you can use I, whereas in an academic essay at university you do not use I. You talk about, you use a passive a lot, and you talk about things you depersonalize it. The extra information, the extra guidance that IELTS gives you here asks you to give relevant examples from your own knowledge or your own experience, and that's what you should do. So you can use I and you can personalize it. So let's now look at your essay, which is on the left. So this is a good start. As a result of the development of healthcare, citizens can now count on longer life and increased life expectancy. A nice general introduction which reflects the question. You might want to say rely upon instead of count on, because that's better. Count on is a bit informal, a bit IELTS 5-6. And it's an introduction that is absolutely fine, stands alone, but it leads into what we would call the thesis statement. Now, the thesis statement in any essay, whether it's short or long essay, is going to say, what is this essay going to say, and which side of the fence, which side of the argument are you going to fall on overall. Sometimes you just discuss a topic, but this doesn't say discuss. It really wants you to say, do you think? So it really does want your opinion. Do you think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? So this is the development here, and do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Now you can give a balanced answer overall, but I always suggest this is a kind of 70-30 essay, whereas on balance, you look at both sides of the argument, but you say on balance, 70% to 30% you think the advantages do outweigh the disadvantages, or it could be the other way, that the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. But you would state that here, and then the rest of your essay, especially the main body of the essay, would argue your case. So what do you say? This essay believes that the main benefit of this phenomenon is that older people can spend more time with their family members, and this outweighs the primary drawback, mainly the higher financial burden of the national budget. So there you go. You've answered it. You've said in your introductory paragraph, where you're going to sit on this. You've allowed for both sides, but you are generally going to fall on the side that this is a benefit. Its advantages outweighs the disadvantages. So that's nice so far. Moving on to the second paragraph, you say the longer men and women live, it is more likely that they develop medical conditions, such as, and then you give 3 examples. That's okay, apart from there's slight inaccuracy in terms of the expression. It's slightly awkwardly expressed. So I would probably say, the longer that men and women live, the more likely it is that they develop medical conditions. So that's just getting a little bit the grammar sorting out in terms of the pronouns and the order of the words. And then you can say comma, such as, and then you can give your 3 examples: diabetes, joint problems, or hearing loss. And all of those are spelled correctly. Now I can see at this point you've started to write something and then crossed it out. You've thought differently and you've gone down to here instead. What you've done here is, in fact, you've carried on, or appeared to have carried on, this sentence and not started a new sentence, because as far as I can see you've got which can be extremely costly for nations. So it seems to be that you are saying that diabetes, joint problems, hearing loss, which are 3 examples of developing medical conditions that are developing, are extremely costly for nations. Now, my concern here, and this is possibly where you're going slightly wrong, is that as you've written this, you have slightly lost sight of the sentence that you're writing. You've started to write this here: while these medical issues can be treated well and should not influence these people's overall well-being, the increased need of medical assistance can be extremely costly. So you've decided to remove something, but I can still read what it says, and there's some things there that are actually pretty good in terms of the vocabulary and what you want to say, because you've got the word well-being and increased need of medical assistance is nice, but you've decided to erase that or cross that out for some reason, and you've extended this original sentence, but it remained, but kept what seems to be the full stop here and not a comma, because this carries on which can be extremely costly for nations. So what appears to have happened is possibly one thing that you've alluded to. You've kind of lost focus a little bit already, and that you, in writing something, changing your mind, writing something differently, it's not as coherent as it was maybe before. So what you wrote before actually is more coherent. So let's move on. That is to say, so here you are saying something in other words. That is to say that the higher reliance on medical systems among the older age groups can result in vast sums being diverted from education or other social areas. That's a nice idea which has been expressed very well. For example, and this is good, you're bringing in examples from your knowledge. In the US, 80% of the annual national medical spending is allocated for the treatment. So your knowledge of the medical profession, I think because that's your line of work, and your knowledge of the situation in the US without any books to refer to, is that 80% of the annual national medical spending is for the treatment of the over 80s. However, and this is good, I believe that most countries can cope with their costs if in turns it results in families living together for a longer time. So we need a indefinite article, a longer time, not for longer time. So that's a slight grammatical error there. So it's a good idea. It's spelt correctly and the grammar is mostly correct. I'm not going to dispute your figure of 80%. It seems to me quite high, because from what I know in the US, people have a lot of private health insurance. But that's just my opinion. It's not for me as the examiner to question your statistics or your question your opinions in this way, as long as you clearly express them. And the point about that is, it's not important to be accurate in terms of the facts. You don't have to be factually correct, as long as you express your opinions correctly and the grammar and the spelling is good, is fine as far as IELTS is concerned. Going on to the next paragraph, you said that you talk about a primary advantage, the first advantage. Younger and older generations spend more time with each other in a good health. Now, this is where your grammar's gone slightly off here. With each other in a good health is poorly expressed. What you needed to say was something quite different, which I've put in the box here. In the past, people used to pass away at the age of 50 to 60. Pass away is quite an informal way of saying to die, but that's okay. It's okay for this sort of level. And they could not talk with their grandchildren or teach them about family traditions from bonds. Now, at this point, it's going a little bit downhill in terms of quality. It's getting a little bit more basic, a bit more informal. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the spelling, and I can't see much wrong in terms of the grammar in that second part, but it's just very sort of basic ideas going on, and you've lost a bit of academic language. I mean, it doesn't have to be hugely academic, but it's very sort of IELTS 4 or 5 sort of basic sort of vocabulary in that section. Now, this is fine because you bring in your own example, your own experiences of a situation in Hungary, where you're from, in the 1960s, and you give a statistic. Now, again, I'm not going to query the statistics. I have to believe you when you say that I think it's 12, or is it 70% of children at the age of 10 did not. Now, you've got 10 here. Now, with numbers, anything up to 10 I would spell, so write out the word 10. Anything above 10, above 12, then if it's a percentage or it's a unit of currency or a year, as you've got here, 1960, then you don't spell it out, you just write the numbers. So I would have written 10 there. Do not remember the grammar. Okay, so what's happened here is, as you thought might have happened, is you kind of lost your way a little bit, and it's gone a bit sort of basic. Really is kind of high school sort of level. So that's why I believe the increase in life expectancy. So you start off all right. You start off with good intentions by talking about an advantage, because you said that the advantages do outweigh. But we just need a higher level of vocabulary here. So you could have. So you could have expressed this in a slightly more academic way, because you're not going to get much of a high mark for lexical resource here. You're playing it safe and using words that you know how to spell and you know the meanings of. In reality, what's happened is that it's too balanced, or you've got equal amounts of disadvantages, opinions and ideas for disadvantages as compared to advantages, and so it's a little bit rushed towards the end. It feels that way because, in conclusion, modern medical systems help citizens live longer, and although it can be expensive for the nations, its main advantage is generations forming bonds clear outweighs it. So you are quite right. I mean, when you said about losing focus, for me it does lose focus, and I would think towards the end it goes down to about an IELTS band 6 only. So again, I think you've got the potential, because you've shown that both in task 1 and the beginning of this task 2 answer, in terms of you've got a good range of vocabulary already, you know it, but under pressure with the time element, you seem to get a bit kind of, you said your brain gets a bit frazzled, a bit overloaded, and you come out with some less coherent and more basic kind of ideas, and it's lost structure. So it's lost in terms of paragraphing, in terms of overall structure, it's lost some focus on there. So the most I would give this is probably about 6.5, which is some way short of where you want to be, because you want to be 7 or 7.5. And talking about structure, if we go back to the sample answer which I showed you at the beginning, we can see that in this sample answer there is a better structure. So in this answer, you're talking about the thesis statement coming here. Longer life is only desirable if you can look after yourself and be independent, otherwise there can be disadvantages for everyone. So on balance, it says despite this unless this happens, it's mostly disadvantages, and that's how the essay is going to argue. So three body paragraphs here, and then in the summary you said conclusion to sum up is fine, in conclusion is fine, I believe. So we need to say I believe that we should aim to keep. So this is going to summarize what you said at the outset, and which has been argued by the three middle body paragraph paragraphs, so that your conclusion, your summary, nicely bookends and wraps up quite neatly your side of the argument, what your opinion is. So if you want to do another writing task 2 or task 1 and a task 2, look at my email. As I said in the email, I'm quite happy for you to do that. If you want to leave it there, that's fine. You can just take this advice on board. But I think you need to practice more. You need to practice more outside of the actual test, which is a lot of money, and you don't want to spend all that money again unless you know you can be guaranteed of getting a 7 at minimum. Hope that helps.